Well, hello, my dears. Welcome to my very messy studio. I'm in the process of moving, so things are a little chaotic here, but I wanted to take some time today and we're going to learn about the duplicate stitch. Now, the duplicate stitch is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to take your tapestry needle and you're going to take a contrasting color of yarn and you are going to duplicate the stitches that you have already knit. Sorry, got a little tech thing here that I have to fix. There we go. So, um, our friendly host has put a link in the chat, and that is a free pattern download. It is called the Spring Flower Coaster, and it's very, very simple knitting. It's just a little stockinette stitch square, and then you're going to do your duplicate stitching on top of it. Now, why would I use duplicate stitching instead of knitting with multiple colors of yarn? And there's a couple of reasons. One is, particularly if you're a newer knitter, do you really want to have to change colors in a row for 4 or 5 or 6 stitches? You don't. If you don't have to, it's really much less complicated to go back and fill them in with duplicate stitch. The other reason you might need duplicate stitch, even if you are doing more than one color in a row, perhaps there's just one, perhaps it's a very intricate color work pattern. There might be one stitch in an alternate color or 2 stitches. I don't want to start a bobbin for that. I don't want to have that one more bobbin in the back of my work that I have to twist and untwist while I'm knitting. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put that stitch in with duplicate stitch so I don't have an extra strand of yarn that I have to manipulate while I'm knitting. And then the other instance where I would use duplicate stitch is I'm knitting a complicated color work pattern. I'm knitting, 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 and I see that I have made a color work mistake several inches below. Am I going to rip out several inches of color work? No, I'm not. I'm going to get my tapestry needle and I'm going to get my yarn and I'm going to fix my issue with duplicate stitch so I don't have to rip out all that work that I already did. So if we could move down to the hand camera, please. And then let's get our lighting a little better. So this is not the actual flower coaster from the pattern, but it is close enough. It is it is just.
Hello, everybody. We're having a slight technical issue. We'll be getting started here again very shortly. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for your patience. We'll be getting started here again. Mary Beth, I'm going to count you back down. All right, coming in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi guys. I guess we're going to start from the okay. That was my next question. Are we starting from the beginning or are we starting from the hand camera? So I apologize for that. all of you watching. My neighbors are having work done, and I think somebody hit my internet box. So the internet glitched and it took me out, and hopefully it won't happen again. So, as I was saying, if you download the spring flower coaster pattern that our friendly host has put a link for you in the chat, you can see that the entire square part was knit using only one color. So that's the main color. And all of the color work addition happened by working duplicate stitch using a tapestry needle and some yarn. The other thing I wanted to show you on this particular pattern is here is the pattern that they used on the coaster. And here is a blank one in case you wanted to design your own color work pattern and work that with duplicate stitch. Now, why does this look a little weird to you here when it looks normal here? And that is because knit stitches are not square. So if you design a pattern on graph paper that you just regular graph paper that you got at the store, which is based on squares, your pattern when you knit it is going to elongate. So if you get knitter's graph paper in which the squares are not exactly square, I guess saying square is the wrong thing, I guess they're rectangles in this case. But knitter's graph paper is something you can purchase, or sometimes you can find it online to download. So if you want to draw your own duplicate stitch or even knitted color work project, you want to use knitter's graph paper. So even though it looks a little weird on the graph paper, perhaps it will look perfect in your knitting. So you want the graph paper so that when you color in your squares or rectangles, as the case may be, it looks exactly like it will when you knit it. So I hope that was clear. So if you draw on squares, it will elongate in your knitting. If you draw on knitter's graph paper, which is already elongated, what you draw and what you knit will look the same. The next thing I want to talk about is the yarn needle that you want to use. Now, if you're anything like me, you have 2,012 yarn needles floating around because you lose them from time to time, and then you buy more, and then, you know, there's yarn needles everywhere. For duplicate stitch, you want a yarn or tapestry needle that has a more blunt tip rather than something like, let's see, this one has a super pointy tip. And the reason I don't want a super pointy tip is when I'm doing duplicate stitch, I don't want to split the plies of the yarn. I want to follow the yarn in the path that it originally took. So having a pointy needle is going to make it easier to split the plies, which I don't want. So having a more blunt needle is going to make it easier to follow the path that we have. We're not going to split plies. So there are two ways to work duplicate stitch, and we're going to take a quick look at both of them. You can do your color work horizontally, or you can do it vertically. So I'm going to start with horizontal. So I don't like to tie knots in my work. If you're knitting the flower coaster, it tells you where your first stitch is going to go, so you can follow the chart. It has you place a locking stitch marker while you're doing the knitting, but I'm sort of freehanding today. So you can, let's see how close we can get without it being blurry. So you can see that I came up right in the center of that stitch. I did not split any plies. So now I'm going to use my needle to trace this stitch. This is the one I want to duplicate. So I'm going to take my needle, go under this leg of the stitch above and under this leg of the stitch above. Let's see what that looks like on the back. So you can see I just have my end down here hanging out. I'm going to weave that in later. I did not tie a knot. And you can see there is my yarn or tapestry needle passing under that stitch. And you can also see I'm trying desperately not to split the plies. I don't want to split the yarn. I want to follow it. So I'm going to very gently pull this in, and I'm going to go down in the exact same hole where I came up. Now this first stitch that I'm showing you, it might look a little loosey-goosey, and that's okay. That's because I have not woven that other end in yet. That tail is hanging out. So this is going to loosen up a little. Now gauge is something you will get the hang of as you do this more and more. You want the gauge of your duplicate stitch to match the gauge of your knitting as closely as possible. So I'm going to go now, I'm going to go do the stitch next to the one where I just was, because we're working horizontally first. So I'm coming up in the center of that stitch, giving it a little tug, not too tight, not too loose, and I'm going down and up. So once again, I'm going under the stitch above the one I want to duplicate, and I want to make sure that I am not splitting plies. I want to trace the path of the main color yarn. So I'm going to tighten this up a little bit. So now to make things go a little more quickly, and since you have the idea of what's going on here, instead of doing each stitch individually, we're gonna scoop. This is called the scoop method. So we're going back down in the exact same hole where we came up, and then I'm taking my needle right over to the next hole where I want to come up. I'm going to pull it through. Go under the stitch above the one we want to duplicate and pull it through. Once again, trying to keep the gauge of the stitches you're adding to be very similar to the gauge of the piece you knit. Now, if you have to go back and tighten it up a little bit or loosen it up a little bit, you can do what I'm doing here and use your yarn needle to do that. And I find when I'm doing this that I actually pull slightly tighter than you might think, because I want that stitch to sort of recess and really blend in. So now I'm going down. I know this is so hard to see. Going down in the exact same hole where I came up. And again, to work horizontally, I'm just going into the next stitch next to it. If you are comfortable doing Kitchener stitch, this is a very similar set of mechanics. Because you can see if I go under this stitch right here, when I come down here, I'm going half in one column and half in the other column. So if you're confident with Kitchener stitch, it's a very similar way of working. So again, make sure that it looks the same as the other stitches. We're having an ASMR day today, I think. If you have any questions while we're moving ahead, feel free to ask me, and I will answer them if I can. So here we have it. Again, if I'm looking at this, I think, oh, this looks a little loose. I'm going to use that yarn needle to tighten it up. And if I was using the chart, if I was not freehanding, I could count. I could say, okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to do 7 stitches in this color. I'm going to put one more stitch in here. Now, assuming, for the sake of argument, this is the last stitch in my horizontal row, I'm not going to scoop over to here at this point. I'm just going to take my work down to the back. So once again, going down in the exact same hole that I came up in. So there is my first horizontal row. Do I always have to work right to left? No, I do not. I can work left to right. It works just the same way. So I'm going to the row above is what I want to do next. So I'm going to come up. Oh, I got my tail in the way. Excuse me. Phew. Excuse me. And then I can follow this around. Go back in the same hole I came out of. And if I want to scoop, I can scoop in this direction. Now notice, since I'm building horizontal row on top of horizontal row, then when I get to this second row, I am coming in and out of a stitch that I've already put a duplicate stitch in. Now I tend to go right to left in this direction because I am right-handed. But again, if I'm working left to right, I'm going to have to scoop from left to right. Just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to try and go this way. Now I am not ambidextrous, don't be super impressed, but I'm wondering, for the sake of, again, just doing a couple of duplicate stitches, I'm wondering if I work left to right, if it would make more sense to run my needle from left to right, and I think that it would. I think it would be easier. We're going to go down in this one and up in this one. And this is what I was saying before, you're in the center of a duplicate stitch that you've already made. Let's go left to right again. Okay, that's the one we're going to copy. So we're going under the stitch above the one you're duplicating. Okay, now I'm going to say this. I think it looks better if you go left to right when you're working left to right, because the legs, when I went right to left, are ever so slightly crossed. Is anybody going to notice this but you? Probably not. But I always say the devil is in the detail. And so if your detail work is as close to perfect as you can get it, then your project overall is going to look better. So I'm going to make an executive decision and say, if you're doing a horizontal row from left to right, I would cross my stitches from left to right. I would do my duplicate stitch from left to right. Now again, I'm not left-handed. I am not ambidextrous. I'm just using my left hand here because I think it makes the work look neater. And it's not such a delicate thing that you can't do it with your left hand. It's not like suddenly asking somebody to knit with their left hand when they don't. So if I was working in horizontal rows, that's how I would do it. Now, there might be an instance. Okay, so this is my last stitch in the row, so I'm not going to scoop. I'm going to go under this. Whoops. I'm going to go under the stitch the stitch over the one I want to duplicate. Pull that through and take it down. I'm going to grab a different color here just to be interesting. Now, if I had a block of color, like the green, I'm going to do that in horizontal rows because I think it's easier to do a color block in horizontal than it is in vertical. And we are going to do vertical in a second. I think doing a block vertically is tedious, and I'll show you why in 1 second. But if you see a big color block, you're going to want to work in horizontal rows. But now here I've got this little stem piece going up here, so I have to do that vertically. That's my only choice. Oh, I unthreaded my needle. Let's try that again. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and they will be conveyed to me. I'm just going to start over here so I'm going to, once again, leave a tail in the back to weave in later. Go under the 2 legs of the stitch over the one I want to duplicate. I'm just getting my first stitch in here sort of anchored so I can get started. Okay, so I'm ready to go again. So now what I want to do is come up in the center of the stitch I just made, right? I want to come up. So if you're a crocheter, think about a chain stitch. Think about the way each subsequent chain, you're bringing yarn through the chain you've already made. It's that idea if you crochet also. So this is the stitch I want to duplicate. I'm going under the 2 legs of the stitch above it. Going down in the same place I came up. Trying not to split the plies. Coming up in the center of the stitch I just made. Going under the legs of the stitch over the stitch I want to duplicate. Now, can you do a scoop trick when you're going vertical? You can. So in this case, I want to go down the same place I came up, and I want to scoop up into the center of the stitch that I'm making, if that makes sense. Again, if you understand how a chain stitch works in crochet, this is a very similar technique. So I'm going here, I'm going under those stitches. Going down the same place I came up and scooping up into the center of the stitch I just made. Go under the legs of the stitch over the one we're trying to duplicate. Going down in the same place we came up and up in the center of the stitch we just made. So that's how I would do a vertical row. Now, why do I not recommend color blocking vertically? Because it's directional. If I'm working horizontally, I can go right to left or left to right, and it looks the same. But if I'm working bottom to top, the next section in a color block I would want to do is top to bottom. And I'm just going to say, trust me, it's not fun to do it upside down. And you can't really just, if you turn the work, let me do it. If you turn the work, it's just difficult. It's difficult to see, to get your loop here and coming in and out of here. You can do it. I just find here, let's do it so I can prove to you that you can. I just find it so much easier to do my color blocking in horizontal. All right, let me get this out of the way. So let's see. I'm duplicating this. Yes, I'm duplicating this stitch. Then I'll go back down where I came up, and then I'll have to scoop just to the next stitch. Then we're going to go under here. See, I'm having trouble figuring this out, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I would highly recommend, if you had to work color block, to do it horizontally. I just think it is 200% easier to see than to try and do adjacent rows vertically. Now my neighbor's handyman is back, so we're going to quick look at the back so you can see what the back looks like. So these are my horizontal rows, and you can see this is very neat. My colors recessing into the reverse stockinette stitch side of my work. And I'm just getting these little horizontal lines. The only time I'm getting a little extra is when I'm jumping from one row to the next. So that's nice, smooth, flat. When I'm finished, I'm just going to take those ends and weave them in. No big deal. And if you work vertically, like we just did, instead of getting horizontal lines like we did for our horizontal duplicate stitch, we're going to get vertical lines like we did for our vertical stitch. So it looks very nice and neat in the back. Again, if you do any kind of embroidery, it looks like back stitching. So since we don't seem to have any questions, I want to thank you for your kind attention. And thank you for hanging out with me while my internet glitched. I am sorry, but I hear the handyman coming back. So I'm going to sign off before anything else goes wrong. But that is how you work the duplicate stitch, both horizontally and vertically. You can use it for our spring flower coaster, or you can use it in your own projects. Just remember to make sure that you get knitter's graph paper, not traditional square graph paper. I'm Mary Beth Temple. I thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again here real soon. Bye-bye.